Amidst the freezing cold, a sound broke a man's heart. It was a cry for help. The snowstorm raged across Alaska, with howling winds and deadly silence, until that desperate cry cut the air. What he found that night will give you chills. In that almost absolute darkness, only the weak light of a flashlight cut through the layers of snow that fell incessantly. The sound, fragile and intermittent, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the wind itself was toying with the man's senses. For a moment, he considered returning to the safety of his cabin. After all, many had lost their lives following mysterious sounds during storms in Alaska. The stories of the elders echoed in his mind, tales of evil spirits that imitated human voices or children's cries to lure travelers to their doom deep in the frozen forests. Some said these sounds were just the wind passing through specific rock formations. Others swore they were lost souls, unable to find their way to the other world. Whatever the truth, the fact remained. Following strange sounds during a thunderstorm rarely ended well. If you've ever been moved by stories of unlikely connections between humans and wild animals, leave a like now, so more people can learn about this incredible story of survival in Alaska. But there was something about that particular calling, a vulnerability, a genuine desperation that cut through the barriers of the instinct for self-preservation. It was a sound that spoke directly to the heart, transcending the cold logic of survival that often dominated life in Alaska. The man adjusted the hood of his parka, checked that his knife was easily accessible on his belt, and stepped forward into the storm. The snow crunched beneath his fur-lined boots, each step requiring a conscious effort against the wind that seemed determined to push him back. His breath formed dense clouds in front of him, freezing almost instantly on his beard. The man pulled his fur coat more tightly around his body and continued forward, guided only by that faint sound and his experienced hunter's intuition. A few meters from where he had begun his search, his flashlight illuminated a small depression in the snow. There, almost completely covered by the relentlessly falling flakes, was the source of the call. His eyes widened at the unexpected discovery, and his heart sped up in his chest. What would he do now? The decision he made in the next few moments could change everything. In Alaska, where temperatures often plummet below 30 degrees C during the harsh winter, life is a constant battle. For the few humans who choose to inhabit these remote stops, each day presents a series of challenges against an environment that seems determined to drive out any creature that dares challenge its icy domain. The region is known for its wild, untouched beauty, landscapes that seem to have been forgotten by time, where modern man is still just a visitor. Vast coniferous forests stretch for miles, interspersed with crystal-clear rivers that remain frozen for most of the year. Majestic mountains covered in eternal snow line the horizon like silent sentinels. And above all, the sky. A sky that during winter offers endless nights, occasionally illuminated by the hypnotic dance of the northern lights. This land of extremes only attracts a special kind of person, those who seek solitude or challenge, or a connection to nature that cities cannot offer. And of course, the native peoples, who have inhabited these regions for millennia, developing an ancient wisdom about how to survive and thrive where others would just try to survive. Nanook, a lone Inuit hunter, knew this reality well. Descended from generations that had survived in these unforgiving lands for millennia, he carried in his blood the ancient wisdom necessary to thrive where most would simply try to survive. His name, which means polar bear in the language of his people, had been chosen by his grandfather, who had seen in the newborn the same silent strength and determination that characterized the great Arctic predator. Their hut, built from thick logs and reinforced with traditional techniques, was isolated miles from any other human settlement. Strategically located on the side of a small hill, protected by a cluster of ancient pine trees that partially blocked the wind, the structure represented the perfect balance between traditional knowledge and practical adaptations that Nanook had developed over the years. For many, such isolation would seem unbearable, but for Nanook it represented a deeper connection to the earth and its rhythms. He had tried for some years of his youth to live in the small Inuit settlement about 50 miles away, But the call of solitude had proven stronger. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy human company. He deeply valued occasional visits with his relatives and friends. But something in his soul found peace only when he was alone in the wild, where every decision and every consequence was his, and his alone. He lived by the unwritten rules that governed wild Alaska. Never waste food. Always respect predators. Prepare meticulously for winter. And, perhaps most importantly, never underestimate the weather. How many experienced travelers, skilled hunters, and even natives had perished because they ignored the subtle signs that preceded a deadly storm? In Alaska, the weather wasn't just an environmental factor. It was an invisible predator, more dangerous than any bear or wolf. The region where he lived was known for its breathtaking landscapes, majestic mountains covered in eternal snow, coniferous forests that seemed to touch the sky, and northern lights that danced in the sky during the long winter nights. But this beauty was accompanied by constant dangers. Storms appeared out of nowhere, turning clear days into white nightmares in a matter of minutes. Wolves, bears, and other predators were always on the prowl, and the cold itself was a silent killer that did not forgive the unprepared. During the fleeting summer, the region was transformed. The sun barely set, creating the famous endless days that characterized high latitudes. The snow melted, revealing a carpet of vegetation that exploded with color and life. Wildflowers of every hue bloomed in alpine meadows, and wild berries offered a sweet reward for those who survived the lean months. The rivers, finally free of ice, teemed with salmon returning to spawn, attracting bears and other predators, including humans like Nanook, who took advantage of the temporary abundance to stockpile food for the coming winter. But summer in Alaska was just a brief breather, a momentary pause before winter resumed its grip. And it was during these long months of cold and darkness that the true character of the region revealed itself. It was when the northern lights danced across the sky like ancient spirits, when the silence became so profound, it seemed to have a substance of its own, when survival required not just physical strength, but also strength of spirit. In this extreme environment, Nanook had developed a meticulous routine. Each morning began by checking the weather, assessing his provisions, and carefully planning his movements. Improvisation, although sometimes necessary, was rarely his first choice. In Alaska, the impulsive often became tragic stories told around campfires. His typical day varied with the seasons, but always followed a pattern established over the years. In winter, I woke up before dawn, which, at that latitude and time of year, meant many hours before any light appeared on the horizon. He lit the fire he had carefully prepared the night before, allowing heat to gradually fill the cabin. While I waited, I prepared strong tea with local herbs that I had collected over the summer, and preserved specifically for these moments. Breakfast usually consisted of smoked fish or dried meat, accompanied by a portion of fat, essential for maintaining body heat in extreme temperatures. Then, weather permitting, Nanook would go out to check his traps. This was a crucial daily ritual, not only because of the food it provided, but also because unchecked traps resulted in waste, and in Alaska, wasting food was a serious offense against the unwritten laws of survival. And it was precisely because he knew so well the dangers of this land that Nanook was so surprised at himself when, on that particularly violent stormy night, he left the safe shelter of his hut to investigate a strange sound that had penetrated the thick walls and the constant howl of the wind. Nanook had prepared himself for another night alone with his thoughts. The fire in the central fireplace kept the cabin cozy, while the snow piled up outside, and the wind lashed the walls as if demanding entry. He had completed his daily tasks early, anticipating the arrival of the storm that the elders of his tribe could predict by reading the subtle signs in the sky and in the behavior of the animals days before. The cabin, although small by modern standards, was perfectly suited to the needs of a solitary man. It consisted of a main room with a central fireplace, where Nanook cooked and spent most of his time, and a small annex space that served as a storage area for food, tools, and other essential supplies. The walls, constructed of thick logs carefully fitted together and sealed with moss and clay, provided surprisingly effective insulation against the relentless cold. The roof, slightly sloped to allow snow to slide rather than accumulate, was covered with layers of birch bark, protected by a final layer of skins waterproofed with animal fat. That's when, in a brief lull in the gusts, he heard that unmistakable sound, a cry of anguish that seemed to come from somewhere near his property. Initially, he thought it might just be the wind passing through some crack in the walls or ceiling, creating that almost vocal sound that sometimes fooled even the most experienced ears. But when the sound repeated itself, more distinctly this time, Nanook realized that it was not the work of the wind. He was a living being somewhere out there in the storm, in danger. When Nanook finally found the source of the crying, his flashlight illuminated a scene that left him paralyzed. There, shivering violently and almost covered in snow, was a small grizzly bear. The cub, which didn't appear to be more than a few months old, had wet fur clinging to its tiny body, and its eyes, although almost closed due to weakness, showed a silent desperation. The encounter left the hunter in momentary shock. Grizzly bears were fearsome predators in Alaska, respected and avoided whenever possible. Even a baby could pose a danger, not necessarily to itself, but to its protective mother who would certainly be nearby. Nanook quickly scanned the surroundings with the flashlight, looking for signs of the adult bear, but the storm made it impossible to see beyond a few meters. The cub made another faint sound, barely audible now. Nanook could see that he was in critical condition. His breathing was irregular, and small layers of ice were already beginning to form on his fur. Alaska's relentless cold was slowly claiming yet another life. Approaching cautiously, Nanook was able to get a better look at the small animal. There were no obvious signs of injury, but the calf appeared to be extremely weak, probably separated from its mother, long enough to be suffering from hypothermia and starvation. His eyes, half open, stared at Nanook for an instant, not with fear, as one would expect, but with something the hunter could only describe as a silent cry for help. It was at that moment that Nanook realized the true situation. The cub was alone. Perhaps the mother had been killed by hunters, or perhaps she had succumbed to one of the region's many dangers. Whatever the case, this little creature was completely vulnerable, and, without intervention, would certainly not survive the night. Nanook crouched down, watching the little bear more closely. It was a young grizzly bear, one of Alaska's most iconic species. Its fur, normally thick and resistant, was soaked by the melting snow, thus losing much of its insulating capacity. The paws, normally robust and powerful even in puppies, seemed fragile as the animal tried unsuccessfully to rise from the snow that was gradually swallowing it. But what impressed Nanook most were the cub's eyes, dark eyes that, even in that state of extreme weakness, still maintained a spark of life, a primordial determination to continue existing against all odds. It was a look Nanook knew well, the look of a survivor, the same look he himself had seen reflected in mirrors of frozen water during particularly harsh winters. An internal conflict arose in Nanook's heart. The traditional teachings of her Inuit people said that nature had its own way, and interfering with the natural cycle of life and death was rarely wise. Furthermore, bringing a predator, even a young one, close to him, went against all the self-preservation instincts that had kept him alive for so many years in the wild. For generations, his people had coexisted with grizzly bears in a complex relationship of mutual respect and caution. Bears were seen as powerful beings, worthy of admiration, but also healthy fear. Hunting them was a practice shrouded in rituals and strict rules, always with deep respect for the animal's spirit. But rescuing one, directly interfere with the natural course of events? This was beyond traditional practices. On the other hand, letting the cub die when there was a possibility of saving it seemed cruel in a way that deeply troubled his spirit. The elders of his tribe also taught that all creatures were connected in a great web of life, and that acts of compassion strengthened the spirit of both the giver and the receiver. Is the cub's mother nearby? Am I putting myself in even more danger? Doubts flooded his mind as the puppy continued to make those faint sounds that had drawn him there. The biting wind and the incessantly falling snow didn't help his decision. Every minute of hesitation meant less chance of survival for the little bear. Nanook closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the biting cold on his face and the weight of decision on his shoulders. It was then that he remembered the words of his grandfather, a wise man who had guided many in the community. Nature tests us in many ways, but compassion will always be our greatest strength. When we help other beings, we strengthen the spirit that connects everything in the world. His grandfather, Tuktu, had been one of the most respected elders in his community, known for his wisdom and his deep connection to the land. He told stories of times when humans and animals spoke the same language, when boundaries between species were more fluid, and when acts of kindness between different creatures were not only possible but expected. Many considered these stories just legends, but Tuktu always insisted that they contained profound truths about the interconnectedness of all living things. These words echoed in his mind as if the old man was there, at his side, offering guidance at that critical moment. Nanook also remembered the ancient stories, told around campfires of men and animals who had formed unlikely alliances in times of dire need. Were they just legends, or did they contain seeds of truth that were now germinating in his heart? The cub made another faint sound, almost a sigh, as if its strength was finally running out. It was that sound that sealed Nanook's decision. If it costs me my life, he thought, then that will be my fate. With renewed determination, he approached the little bear. Without thinking further, Nanook made his decision. He carefully approached the cub, double-checking that there were no signs of the mother bear nearby. The small animal was so weak that it could barely lift its head to watch the approaching human. His eyes, almost closed from exhaustion and the cold, followed Nanook's movements with what seemed to be a mixture of fear and hope. With slow and deliberate movements, so as not to scare the cub any more than it already was, Nanook removed his thick fur coat. It was a precious item, made from carefully treated caribou skin, which had protected him through many harsh winters. But at that moment, the little bear's need was greater than his own. "You'll be fine, little warrior," he murmured in the Inuit language, knowing the animal didn't understand his words, but hoping the soft tone of his voice conveyed his peaceful intentions. "Let's get out of this cold." The cape was a true work of art, an example of the Inuit skill in creating clothing perfectly adapted to the extreme environment. Crafted from caribou skins carefully selected during the correct season, when the fur was in its ideal condition, it had been stitched together with animal sinew using techniques passed down from generation to generation. The inner side was soft, with the fur facing the body to retain heat, while the outer side had been treated with natural fats to repel moisture. Nanook had inherited the techniques from her mother, an artisan renowned in the community for her exceptional skills. Sacrificing such a valuable piece was not a decision made lightly, especially in the middle of winter, when replacement would be practically impossible until the next hunting season. But Nanook knew that he had other parts in his hut, and the cub, without any effective natural protection at that time, would not survive without immediate help. With extreme care, Nanook wrapped the cub in the cape. The little bear was so weakened that he offered only token resistance, a slight movement of his paws, and a faint grunt that could barely be heard over the howling of the wind. His body, normally warm even in winter thanks to the bear's dense fur and natural fat, was alarmingly cold to the touch. Clutching the precious bundle to his chest, Nanook began the journey back to his hut. What would normally be a few minutes' walk became an epic battle against the elements. The wind seemed to have gained strength, pushing him back, as if nature itself was testing his resolve. The snow, thick and unforgiving, reduced visibility to almost zero, forcing him to rely more on his innate sense of direction than his vision. Every step was a conscious effort. Nanook knew that he now carried two lives in his hands, his own, and that of the small being that fluttered against his chest. One slip, one fall, a few lost minutes, and both could succumb to the relentless cold. But he continued forward, one step at a time, guided by the fierce determination that had kept his people alive in these hostile lands for countless generations. The storm seemed to mock their efforts, releasing gusts of piercing wind that seemed to come from all directions simultaneously. The snow no longer fell vertically, but was flung horizontally, creating a white curtain that transformed the familiar landscape into a disorienting maze. Nanook held the cub tightly against his chest, using his own body as a shield against the elements. The distance between where he had found the cub and his cabin was not great, perhaps half a kilometer under normal conditions. But in that storm, every meter gained felt like a victory. Nanook stayed on course by following landmarks he knew intimately. A rock formation here, a specific group of trees there, the subtle slope of the terrain beneath his feet. Years of hunting in this region had etched the local topography into his memory so deeply that he could navigate it even with his eyes closed. When he finally saw the dark outline of his cabin emerging from the white curtain of the storm, Nanook felt a wave of relief course through his tired body. But he knew the battle was far from over. The cub, now completely motionless in her arms, would need immediate care if it had any chance of survival. With a last-ditch effort, Nanook burst through the door of his hut, quickly closing it behind him to stop the cold and snow from invading his sanctuary. The contrast between the howling storm outside and the relative silence inside was almost surreal. The fire in the central fireplace was still burning, although weaker than when it had left. Wasting no time, Nanook placed the cub close to the fire, but not too close. He knew that heating too quickly could be as dangerous as extreme cold for a hypothermic body. With precise gestures, he fed the fire with more wood, watching the flames gain strength again. Only then, with the most intense light, was he able to properly assess the little bear's condition. The cub was in worse condition than he had initially imagined. His fur, normally thick and protective, was plastered to his small body, revealing how thin he was. Malnutrition was evident in the visible contour of her ribs and narrow waist. His eyes remained closed, and his breathing was so shallow that Nanook had to watch closely to make sure he was still breathing. The situation was critical. Within the relative safety of her dwelling, Nanook quickly lit more lamps to increase the lighting and heat. With efficient movements born of experience, he prepared a nest of furs near the central fire, creating a cozy space for the cub. Gently, he transferred the little bear to this makeshift bed, surrounding him with blankets to preserve any heat his body could generate. The cub was visibly dehydrated, with dry eye membranes and pale gums, signs Nanook recognized from other animals in similar conditions. His shallow, irregular breathing was an alarming sign. Nanook knew he needed to act quickly. From his stockpile of provisions, he removed some melted seal blubber, an energy-rich food that often saved lives in Alaska's harsh winters. Seal blubber was not just a food, it was a traditional medicine, used by Inuit for generations to combat the effects of extreme cold and provide vital energy when other sources were scarce. Rich in essential fatty acids and vitamins, it was considered a treasure among winter supplies. Nanook kept a carefully preserved stockpile specifically for emergencies like this. With infinite patience, he tried to introduce small amounts of the liquid into the puppy's mouth, using his fingertips. Most of it dripped down the corners of the unconscious animal's mouth, but Nanook persisted, knowing that even small amounts could make the difference between life and death. "Come on, little warrior," he murmured repeatedly, like a mantra. "You've survived so far. Don't give up." The hours passed slowly. Nanook kept constant vigil, feeding the fire regularly, checking the cub's vital signs and trying, whenever possible, to get the little animal to ingest more of the nutritious fat. Occasionally, I would dampen a clean cloth with warm water and gently run it through the puppy's fur, helping to wipe away frozen moisture and improve circulation. Outside, the storm continued relentlessly. The wind shook the cabin walls with renewed fury, as if it was indignant at having lost its prey. Nanook knew that if he had taken a few more minutes to find shelter, neither he nor the cub would probably have survived. Nature in Alaska offered no second chances, and it rarely forgave mistakes. But for now, they were safe, sheltered from the storm's fury. It was during one of these cleaning sessions that Nanook observed the little bear breathing more and more slowly. For a terrible moment, he believed that all his efforts had been in vain. The cub seemed to be slipping away into the final sleep that the Alaskan cold offered to so many creatures each winter. "No, not like that," Nanook whispered, his voice breaking with unexpected emotion. Gently, he placed his hand on the cub's chest, feeling the weak heart struggling to keep beating. "You're strong, little one. Stronger than you think. You've survived so far, don't give up." The light from the flames danced on the walls of the cabin, creating shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. The silence inside the room was broken only by the crackling fire and the occasional sounds of the storm outside. Nanook felt a wave of despair take over. He had risked his life to save this little being, and now it seemed like everything would be in vain. At that critical moment, Nanook did something he had never done before. He lay down next to the cub, wrapping his own body around it, offering direct warmth and contact that went beyond what most hunters would ever consider prudent with a wild predator, even a young one. It was an act that transcended the cold logic of survival, born of a deep compassion that surprised Nanook himself. When he was a child, he had witnessed the older women of his tribe using this technique to save human babies at risk of hypothermia. It was traditional knowledge that passed from generation to generation. Direct human heat, skin to skin, was often more effective than fires or blankets. He never imagined that one day he would apply this knowledge to save a bear cub. As he held the bear's small body against his own, Nanook reflected on the strange path that had led him to this moment. As a hunter, he had taken many animal lives to sustain his own, always with respect and gratitude, never out of sport or vanity. I had learned early on that in the delicate balance of Arctic life, predator and prey were fluid roles, not fixed identities. Today's hunter could easily become tomorrow's prey. Night advanced, and the storm continued its merciless attack on the small cabin. The wind howled between the cracks in the walls, creating a dark symphony that contrasted with the tense silence inside the room. Nanook fought sleep, determined not to abandon the cub at his most vulnerable moment. He spoke to him in his native language, telling ancient stories of his people, of the great hunts and memorable winters, of the spirits that danced in the sky and the creatures that shared that immense land. He spoke as if the cub could understand every word, as if communication could transcend the barriers between species. "Did you know that our people believed that long ago, humans and animals could talk freely? That we were all part of the same family?" Nanook smiled as he shared this ancient legend. "The elders say we lose this ability when we begin to see ourselves as separate from nature, as masters rather than brothers. What would you do in Nanook's place? Would you risk your life to save a predator? Or would you follow the laws of nature and let it take its course? Share your opinion in the comments below." As he spoke, his hands worked delicately, massaging the cub's limbs to stimulate circulation, checking his temperature, ensuring he remained in a position that facilitated his breathing. They were technical gestures born from years of experience dealing with life and death situations in Alaska's harsh environment. But there was also an undeniable tenderness in each touch. At some point during that long night, Nanook realized that the answer to his previous moral dilemma lay right there, in that moment of unlikely connection. True strength was not in mastering or avoiding the dangers of nature, but in recognizing that all beings, humans, bears, wolves, and even the trees and mountains, were part of the same web of life, interconnected in ways that were not always obvious, but always meaningful. There was an ancient wisdom to this, something that their ancestors understood intuitively, but that many had forgotten in the race for survival. Nanook felt a strange peace come over him, even as he fought for his dying cub. Whatever the outcome, he had chosen to act with compassion, and that choice alone had changed something within him. As the night progressed, Nanook alternated between periods of intense wakefulness and brief moments of rest, always remaining alert enough to monitor the cub's condition. At some point, he noticed a subtle change. The little bear's breathing, previously so weak and irregular, began to find a more stable rhythm. His body, previously stiff from the cold, gradually began to relax. When the first rays of sunlight began to penetrate through the cracks in the cabin, a miracle happened. The cub opened its eyes, They were dark, deep eyes, still faint, but definitely alive. Nanook felt a wave of relief course through his body. The first battle had been won. Quickly, he offered small pieces of dried fish that he had saved, and to his surprise and joy, the cub accepted the food, chewing slowly with his small jaws. His movements were lethargic, but the simple act of eating on his own was an extremely positive sign. "You have a fighting spirit," said Nanook, watching the cub with a smile on his dry lips. "You need a name worthy of that spirit." It was at that moment that Nanook realized this wasn't just any bear. He was a survivor, just like him. In his heart, he decided to name him Aput, which means snow in Inuit, an appropriate name for a creature found in the white expanse of Alaska. Although he knew the cub would eventually return to the wild, Nanook couldn't help but feel a growing bond with the little being he had rescued from the jaws of death. It was a complex feeling, mixing the natural instinct to protect vulnerable life with the recognition that this same being would one day become one of the most formidable predators in the region. Still, at that moment, looking at the curious eyes that finally showed some vitality, Nanook felt only satisfaction. The storm had abated during the night, and the day brought one of those rare moments of crystal clarity that occasionally blessed an Alaskan winter. The sun, low on the horizon even at midday at this time of year, cast a golden light that transformed the snowy landscape into a blinding spectacle. Through the hut's small window, Nanook could see the outside world, white, vast, pristine, as if the violence of the storm had never happened. In the days that followed, Nanook witnessed a remarkable transformation. Aput gradually gained strength, going from a fragile creature on the verge of death to a curious and energetic puppy. His fur, previously opaque and stuck to his body, regained its natural shine and protective thickness. His eyes, previously almost closed from the cold and exhaustion, now explored every corner of the cabin with genuine interest. Nanook's routine completely adapted to the presence of the new guest. Each morning began with feeding and play, which served both to strengthen the puppy's body and to establish a relationship of trust. During the day, as he carried out his usual tasks inside the hut, he kept Aput close at hand, watching his progress with something that could only be described as paternal pride. This journey of Nanook and Aput is just beginning. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any of our stories of survival and compassion in the wild. Activate the bell to be notified as soon as new videos are published. Nanook adapted his diet to accommodate the cub's needs. Grizzly bears are omnivores by nature, but their cubs rely heavily on protein for their development. Fortunately, Nanook's winter stock included plenty of dried fish, smoked meat, and animal fat, essential foods to help Aput regain strength and build the reserves he would need to survive. Aput's behavior evolved rapidly as he regained his health. In the first few days, he could barely move, passively accepting the care he received. But he soon began to display the characteristic curiosity of bear cubs, investigating objects around the cabin, experimenting with textures with his sensitive paws, and occasionally causing small disasters that Nanook watched with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. There were comical moments, like when Aput discovered his reflection in a bucket of water and spent an entire afternoon alternating between curious glances and clumsy slaps at the liquid surface. Or when he tried to imitate Nanook repairing a tool, sitting on his hind legs and moving his front legs as if he were manipulating invisible objects. Small moments of connection that transcended the fundamental differences between their species. Nanook knew, however, that this situation was temporary. Aput was not a pet, but a wild creature whose nature would eventually call him back to the forests and mountains. Still, every moment of connection between man and bear felt precious, as if they were both learning something fundamental about each other, and perhaps themselves in the process. On a particularly sunny morning when the storm had finally subsided completely and several weeks had passed since the rescue, Nanook opened the cabin door to let in the fresh air. Aput, now considerably stronger, approached the opening, his sensitive nose picking up the countless scents of the outside world. For a moment, Nanook feared that the cub would simply run away, following the instinctive call of the forest. Instead, Aput looked at him as if asking for permission. "Not yet, little one," said Nanook, closing the door. "You need more time to get really strong." In fact, Nanook knew that Aput was probably already physically capable of surviving outside, especially now that the weather had temporarily improved. But something inside him was hesitant to let the cub go. It wasn't just the attachment that had developed, but also a genuine concern for the young bear's chances alone in the wild. Without the guidance of a mother bear to teach him essential survival skills, where to find food, how to avoid danger, how to prepare for hibernation, Aput would face significant challenges. On the other hand, Nanook knew he couldn't keep an adult grizzly bear. Eventually, Aput would grow to a size that would make cohabitation not only impractical, but potentially dangerous. And most importantly, depriving him of his wild nature would be a disservice to the animal, and a violation of Nanook's own beliefs about respecting natural cycles. And just like that, the days turned into weeks. Nanook, who normally spent winters in almost complete solitude, found unexpected company in Aput. The puppy seemed to absorb each teaching, each interaction like a sponge. He quickly learned the limits of the cabin, which objects he could explore and which he should avoid. He developed a surprisingly synchronized routine with Nanook's, as if they had been companions for life. There were moments of pure joy, like when Aput discovered his reflection in a bucket of water and spent hours trying to catch the other bear, or when he learned to roll in the snow during the brief periods Nanook allowed them to explore outside near the cabin. And there were moments of unexpected tenderness, like when the cub, tired after a day of playing, simply curled up next to Nanook to sleep, confident in his safety. However, on the morning of the fourth day, after a particular snowfall that kept them confined to the cabin, while Nanook was tending to his traps near the property, he heard strange noises coming from the forest. His years of experience as a hunter caused his senses to immediately sharpen. Something big was approaching. His heart skipped a beat when he saw it, the shadow of a full-grown bear appearing between the trees. The bear was enormous, with dark brown fur that contrasted dramatically with the snowy landscape. Her powerful muscles were visible even from a distance, and her behavior immediately alerted Nanook that she wasn't just wandering aimlessly. There was a purpose in his movements, a determination in his stance. "The cub's mother is alive, and she is looking for her baby," he realized with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. Nanook's hunting instinct screamed for him to seek immediate refuge, preferably with his weapon in hand. Encounters with grizzly bears rarely ended well for unarmed humans, but another part of him, the same one that had driven him to rescue Aput, kept him transfixed, watching the magnificent animal slowly approaching his territory. The bear stopped about 50 meters from the cabin, her snout raised to the wind, clearly picking up scents that intrigued her. Nanook could see its nostrils flaring, its small, dark eyes examining every detail of the terrain. She knew her cub was close. Bears have one of the best senses of smell in the animal kingdom, able to detect smells from miles away. What surprised Nanook most was the condition of the bear. She was thin, with visible marks from a recent fight, possibly with another predator or with human hunters. That explained why she had abandoned her cub during the storm. It was not negligence, but probably necessity, perhaps fleeing from danger, too injured to return immediately, or simply separated by the fury of the storm. And yet, against all odds, she had survived and found her way back, guided by the powerful bond between mother and son. Nanook slowly retreated towards the hut, without making any sudden movements. Once inside, he found Aput playing nonchalantly with a piece of rope, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding outside. The hunter felt his heart sink. During those weeks of coexistence, he had developed a genuine affection for the little bear. The thought of parting with him was painful. But Nanook now faced his biggest dilemma of all. What to do? The bear could certainly smell her cub, and if she didn't find him, she could destroy everything in her path, including the cabin and Nanook himself. On the other hand, returning the cub meant releasing it into the wild again, without certainty that the mother, visibly weakened, would be able to protect it adequately. Through the window, he could see the bear getting closer and closer, her movements showing increasing agitation. She let out a low growl that made Aput raise his head, suddenly alert. The cub made a high-pitched sound in response, an instinctive call that transcended the weeks of separation. At that moment, Nanook knew he had no real choice. This was not his decision to make. Aput belonged to nature, his mother. Maternal instinct was powerful, and the bear had survived, against all odds, to find her cub. Keeping Aput would be not only dangerous, but deeply wrong. With a heavy heart, Nanook gently took Aput into his arms, feeling the warmth of the small, now healthy body, so different from the icy creature he had rescued weeks ago. He touched the puppy's nose with a finger, a silent farewell gesture. "Your mother came for you, little warrior," he whispered. "It's time to go back to your real family." Aput's weight in his arms was significantly heavier than when he had rescued him. Weeks of proper nutrition and constant care had transformed the skeletal cub into a healthy, robust creature. His fur was shiny, his eyes alive and alert. Nanook felt a wave of pride for having contributed to this transformation, mixed with the melancholy of the imminent separation. Taking a deep breath to calm his nerves, Nanook opened the cabin door and placed Aput outside in the snow. The cub looked at him, confused by the sudden change. For a painful moment, Aput tried to go back inside the hut, to the only home he clearly remembered. Nanook had to gently block his path, guiding him further away from the entrance. "Go," he said softly. "She's waiting for you." He retreated to the relative safety of his door, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away not to threaten the bear. The tension in the air was palpable, as mother and cub became fully aware of each other's presence. The mother bear approached slowly, like a massive shadow among the trees. Its dark brown fur contrasted with the whiteness of the snow. She sniffed the air, then saw her cub. He approached cautiously, smelling Aput thoroughly, as if checking if he was really okay. Nanook watched, fascinated and apprehensive. I had heard stories of bears rejecting cubs after prolonged human contact, viewing the strange smell as a threat. If that happened, Aput's fate would be sealed. Too young to survive alone, rejected by both the human and wild worlds. Aput remained motionless throughout the examination, his small body trembling slightly. Not from the cold, but from an emotion that Nanook could only imagine. Was it recognition? Fear? A complex mix of instincts that humans would never fully understand? And then something unbelievable happened. Instead of grabbing the cub and running away immediately, the bear raised her huge head and looked directly at Nanook. Their eyes met for a moment that seemed like an eternity. There was no aggression in the animal's eyes, just an intensity that Nanook had never seen before. It was as if, for a second, she understood. He had saved her baby. An impossible understanding, perhaps, but in that moment, Nanook felt a connection with the predator that he had never imagined possible. Do you believe that wild animals can feel gratitude? Did the mother bear's reaction surprise you? Leave your comment and let's discuss this fascinating connection between humans and wild animals. Time seemed to freeze as man and beast watched each other, separated by only a few meters of snow and millennia of divergent evolution. Nanook didn't dare breathe, didn't dare break that surreal moment with any sudden movement. Part of him still expected the bear to attack, following the natural instinct to protect her cub against a perceived threat. Instead, something happened that Nanook would recount countless times in the years to come, but that few would actually believe. The bear lowered her head slightly, in a gesture that seemed almost respectful. It wasn't submission. Grizzly bears don't submit to anything or anyone in the wild, but something more subtle, like recognition between equals. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, the bear nudged Aput gently with her nose, encouraging him to follow her. The cub looked at Nanook one last time, as if recording her image, before following his mother into the forest. Step by step, they moved away, their forms becoming less distinct among the trees, until the shadows of the forest swallowed them completely. Nanook remained outside his cabin long after the bears disappeared. A smile formed on his lips, frozen by the cold. He knew he had done the right thing. He never saw that cub again, never knew if Aput survived the many trials that wildlife still had in store for him. But deep in my heart, I knew I had changed a destiny that night. In the years that followed, when snowstorms howled around his cabin, Nanook sometimes imagined Aput as a full-grown bear, strong and powerful, perhaps even with cubs of his own. And when the elders of his tribe gathered to tell stories, Nanook shared his experience, teaching the youngest that compassion can transcend the barriers between species. The story of Nanook and Aput spread among Inuit communities, gaining details and variations as with all stories transmitted orally. Some said that in the years that followed, no bear ever attacked Nanook's traps or threatened his cabin. Others claimed that on certain winter nights a large bear and her cub could be seen in the distance, watching the cabin like silent sentinels. Nanook himself never confirmed these stories, but neither did he deny them. He knew that the truth of his experience was deeper than any legend. What had happened in those winter days had changed something fundamental within him, a deeper understanding of the web of life that connected all creatures. Years later, during a particularly bountiful spring, as the ice began to melt and the first signs of renewed life appeared on the landscape, Nanook was fishing in a river far from his cabin. Concentrated on his activity, he barely noticed movement in the trees on the opposite bank at first. When he finally looked up, his heart sped up. An adult grizzly bear watched him from the other bank. It was a magnificent specimen, at the height of its strength. His fur shone in the spring sun, and his stance exuded the power and confidence of an apex predator. For a moment, the old instinctive fear ran up Nanook's spine, but something about the animal's behavior was unusual. It didn't show aggression or territoriality, just curiosity. The bear tilted its head slightly, as if studying the man. It was then that Nanook noticed a distinct mark on the animal's neck, a line of lighter fur, almost like an old scar. Would it be possible? After so many years? Aput, he whispered more to himself than the animal. The bear did not respond, obviously, but continued his gaze for a few more moments before slowly turning around and disappearing into the forest without showing any aggression. Nanook remained motionless, feeling an inexplicable emotion taking over his chest. I would never know for sure if this was really the puppy I had saved years ago, but I like to believe so. That night, as the sky filled with stars and the northern lights danced on the horizon, Nanook sat by his campfire and contemplated the mysteries of life. How could such a brief connection have left such a profound mark? Maybe it was these small interactions, these seemingly insignificant moments of kindness, that truly shaped destiny. Stories like this remind us that compassion can change lives. In the wild or in the world of men, it's the small acts of kindness that make all the difference. May the story of Nanook and Aput serve as a reminder that even in the coldest and darkest of times, a warm heart can light the way not only for ourselves, but for other beings who cross our path. After all, as the ancient Inuit said, we are all connected under the same sky, sharing the same world, breathing the same air. And in this great web of life, each act of compassion strengthens the threads that bind us together, creating a legacy that endures far beyond our individual lives. If this story touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Next week, we'll bring you the incredible story of a lone wolf who guided a group of lost climbers during a blizzard. Share this video with someone who appreciates stories of deep connections with nature.